You're listening to The Power Project. I'm your host, Brandy Voth, and it's my goal each week to inspire and empower you to go out and lead purpose-filled lives while owning your God-given power. My guest this week, Emily Paulson, is an author, network marketing leader, certified professional recovery coach, and a member of the long-term recovery community. She was formerly trained as a chemist and teacher and rose to success in her skincare company, where she gained her voice and a platform for sobriety and healing. She is passionate about connecting women with resources for recovery from trauma, eating disorders, and substance abuse, and also believes that sharing our truth with each other is the best resource for all. Trigger warning, we do discuss alcoholism and addiction today as we discuss Emily's recovery. I know you're going to be blessed by her story today, so without further ado, let's jump right in, shall we? Hey guys, before we dive into this episode, I wanted to read you one of our most recent reviews from Jess. She says, I so love this podcast. Loving everything Brandy brings to this corner of the internet. I love her passion for women and her unique ability to empower everyone she speaks to. Each episode gets me pumped for my own personal goals. You guys, that is exactly my goal with this podcast. Could you do me a favor and please go let me know what you think of this show, what you love, what you would like to see more of, and let me read your review on the air soon. Welcome back to The Power Project. Each week, I tell you that I am so excited about my guest, and that is the honest to goodness truth. Every single time that God places someone in my life that has a story to share with my audience, I'm grateful for that person. I'm grateful for that connection. And I don't believe that any of this is by happen chance or mistake that these people are placed along our pathway. One such lady that I have on today is going to be my friend, Emily Paulson. Emily, how are you?
I am good, Brandy. How are you?
I'm doing great. It's a good day. It's a good recording day. So you guys, Emily is the wife and mom of 5. She's an entrepreneur and an author of the newly released memoir, The Highlight Reel, Finding Recovery and Honesty Beyond the Filtered Life. So Emily, do you have any previous writing experience, background experience as an author?
Nope. This is my first release. I have experience with writing in the sense that I've always journaled. I've had a blog, things like that. But this was really something that's been on my heart for a long time. I got sober about 3 years ago. And at that point, I really, just like a lot of people who get sober, I think you get to this place where you're like, how did I get here? And I do a lot of kind of my soul searching and my thinking through writing. And so just through little snippets of journaling, I sort of rewound my history and, ended up with a book. So that's how it came about.
So I met you. I say met. I heard you speak last year, 1 year ago at convention. Mm-hmm. And you were someone that obviously I had followed on social media. And I think the title of your book is so accurately titled The Highlight Reel, REAL, because you were someone that I saw on social media and you had achieved success within the company. And I had seen all of the victories that you had celebrated, but I didn't know about your struggle or your path to sobriety until you spoke. And I thought it was so commendable that you were willing to get up there and share your story. You really were one of the first within our company that I saw get really authentic and really vulnerable. And I think that we as women in general, regardless of what you do in life, it's so easy to make social media look pretty and it's so easy to celebrate the highs. So what convinced you to go ahead and take that leap and lean into really, sharing your story and going public with it?
Right. Well, I would say that a lot of my issues, issues with alcoholism, with trauma in the past, which the book really dives into kind of how all of this came about. I found that a lot of my issues were with just not being honest with myself. Thinking I was through something, traumatic experience would happen. I thought I was over it. I thought I'd gotten through it, but really I was just burying it and covering it up with other things. And so I just got to the point where I realized that keeping secrets, keeping things to myself, trying to deal with things on my own was not serving me at all. And so I really made the decision when I decided to stop drinking, when I saw that as, becoming a huge increasing problem in my life, I really put it out there to everyone. I sent texts to like 50 people the day I decided to stop drinking, because I knew I needed not only the accountability, but I needed that for myself. Because I wasn't able to do it on my own. I had to lean on other people. And as I started sharing, people started reaching out, and I started realizing that there's such safety in numbers, and there's such connection in numbers too. The people I was able to connect with, the people who were helping me by sharing their story. And it sort of organically happened. About 2 years ago, I was asked to speak alongside someone else because my business had grown pretty exponentially that year, coinciding with me getting sober, go figure. And, she just asked me to share kind of how that came about and how I was able to develop a new focus. And so that's really the first time I shared a little bit about my journey with alcoholism. And what I saw from that point, the number of people who reached out, the number of people who found a connection, that's really what opened my eyes to, okay, this is what I need to start doing. I need to delve deeper into this. And so that's really when I decided to, I decided to pursue writing and, speaking more about it, speaking more openly about it. And then of course it developed into a book.
Well, and I think that this is such an important takeaway from this, because I do believe that there is not just comfort and not just support from hearing someone else's story shared, but it brings about the whole sense of community, and the person that is at home that feels like they're the only woman who everything looks like it's all going well on the surface. Maybe they feel like, okay, I have my business is going, and I've got 5 kids, and I've got a marriage, and everything looks pretty, but they can feel so alone when they're struggling with whatever issue it is, whether it is trauma or sobriety or something completely different. But for someone to be willing to put that story out, to share openly and authentically, I think this is something that our community of women literally is begging for. They're begging for, share your story with me, not in a sense that I need to feel sorry for you, but in a sense that we need to link arms and build community around these issues and say, it's okay to talk about the hard things. It's okay to say, these are the struggles I went through and the obstacles I had to overcome. And it just makes someone feel less alone in the fight, in the struggle, I believe. And like you're saying, you found that when you spoke about it, there was a response and there was people coming out. But on the flip side of that, because I talk to women all the time that tell me, I have a story and I need to share it. And I speak with a lot of podcasters, speakers, authors. And the biggest hesitation is what are people going to think when I put these words out into the world? I mean, you put your most true, raw, authentic, vulnerable self into the world. And then the second is, what's my family going to say if I release this? What's my husband going to think? My mom, my sister, my best friend. So how did you approach that conversation with your family? And how did you really psych yourself up and convince yourself to go all in and be willing to put that out there?
Sure. Yeah. And that's a question I get a lot, actually. It's funny because when I was active in addiction and actively drinking and, having issues with that, I wasn't thinking about my family. I mean, I thought I was doing all the things I needed to do. Again, I was what, people would classify a functional alcoholic, right? I had a great thriving business. My family looked great. They were all going to school. Everyone was doing well. And yet I was maybe getting drunk at the school auction and not thinking of how that affected them. Or I was maybe not getting up on time in the morning, or I was maybe a little more irritable with them, which I think a lot of moms can relate to. Even just a couple of glasses of wine at night, like it does affect us as parents. And so when I think of all those years that I wasn't thinking of how my drinking was affecting them, to then turn around and say, oh, how will sharing my story affect them? So I think there's a little disconnect with people about being honest.
Yeah.
Being honest with what we do and how we act. And before we ask those questions, like, are you looking at how your actual life right now is affecting your family? Because forget about when you write a book about it. Like, think of what you're doing now, and is that serving you and your family? So for me, I'm honest with who I am. I'm honest with where I've been. And it's created a lot of good conversations with our family as far as, why mommy doesn't drink anymore. My kids grew up with me getting sober. They've grown up through this process, which I think is one of the things that I was looking for when I was out there reading memoirs, and why I did put this book out there is I didn't really have anybody I didn't have a story out there that was mine. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so for me, it was so important for me to show other women who, again, there's so many women struggling with this, moms struggling with this, who look like they have it all together, to know that you can get through this. You will survive, and your family will survive, and they'll be better from it. And, I was really careful in my writing to make sure that I talked about my story.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously there are parts of my story that, my husband and I are married. There are things that happen in our marriage that I shared that obviously affect him, and, is sharing personal things about him. And so we had to have that conversation of, how do you feel about this? And, we felt it was more important for us to have it out there, because again, it was something people don't talk about. And, I wasn't sharing anything personal, say, about my kids. I mean, we've gone through things. Everybody goes through things with their kids. And, it was really important to me to not share anything personal about what they have personally gone through, because those are their words. And if they want to write a book someday, that's great. My parents, there's of course tons anybody can say about their parents, about my brother, about other relationships, friendships. But ultimately, I was really careful about writing things from my perspective, my story, things I had done, so that I wouldn't have to look back and say, oh gosh, that my mom's really irritated with me for sharing that. Right. So I just made sure and had those conversations ahead of time. And, that is the hardest part. I mean, having my mom read it and having my husband read it, because obviously at the end of the day, by the time it was written, they knew everything that was in it. But reading a story from that perspective is really hard, but it lends to such great conversations. And I mean, my relationship with my mom is so much closer. My relationship with my husband is so much closer. With my kids, so I understand the question when people ask me, but I also think it's just one of those things, and until you've done it and you shared it, that you can't realize how freeing and really connecting it is.
Yeah. And I think this is a conversation I've had with both with my husband and my mother, because I'm gearing up to publish a book as well. And this is all, and I always tell people exactly what you just said. You have to make sure you're telling your truth and your story and how you felt in the moment, with no malicious intent, and make sure that it's really just your story and the way you walked through it, because we can have three people in the room that all experience the same thing and have a different story and a different takeaway when they walk away from it. So I think that's so important. But I love that you just were willing to go ahead and share, and that your mother and your father, your mother and your husband were good with it and had the conversation, and that your relationship is doing better. Obviously, I mean, everyone is. You've walked through a healing process, so it's to be expected that your relationships are going to get better. I want to speak just a bit, and I don't want to go into super depth, because the listeners are going to have to buy the book to read the whole story. But I mentor traffic survivors, and every single girl that comes through the aftercare home has had childhood trauma before, before addiction of any sort. And the majority of them have had addictions of all types. And I think it's really important that we speak to this because, I've seen the meme that says, pot's not the gateway drug and a wine cooler is not the gateway drug. Trauma is the gateway drug that really lends itself. And I know you did a massive amount of research on trauma. It's so evident in the book. And I appreciate that because I really like to have some science and facts behind why people do the things they do. Can you just lean in a little bit into the trauma and how that fuels addiction and really spawns addiction?
For sure. So the first thing I have to say about that is I knew when I wrote this book and I knew when it was released that I would have feedback from women, knowing that more people go through this than publicly admit, right?
Yes.
And of course, in the last couple of years with all the Me Too movement and people coming out of the woodwork, you realize that this is such a big problem. So knowing that, even still, I have been floored by the number of people who have reached out to me. I mean, I can count on one hand the number of women who've read it who haven't reached out with some sort of similarity, with saying, I've had some sort of sexual abuse. I've, been involved in a rape. I've had some sort of sexual trauma of some point in their past. I mean, shockingly to me. And that was knowing that it was such a big problem and doing all that research. So it's has such a bigger impact, I think, on our society than anybody even realizes, because again, we have that issue of secrecy with it. People have kept this to themselves. And on that, that was really where it stemmed from me, being young and having a traumatic experience. And when you're young, you might think you're okay with something. You can rationalize things when you're young because, your brain's not developed, and you go through things and something happens and then you go to school and you have a normal day and you think you're fine. Right. And so it really comes down to not talking through things when you're young and kind of stunting that growth, growing through it, healing, that, I had to rewind really all the way back to when I was a kid to get through my addiction, because I realized that, I had a traumatic experience as a child. And then I had other, issues as a teenager, that kind of filled that hole, right? That I was left with after this experience, and feeling kind of less than. And this really helped me not only in my relationships with men then in that point, because it is hard to go from a traumatic experience sexually to having a normal sexual relationship, especially when you're talking about teenagers, when, again, you're immature, you're making decisions on, a not fully developed brain. So you've got all of these things going on, and you throw in alcohol or drugs into the mix. And so I think that's where it becomes kind of this recipe of dependence. I believe in the addiction model and the behavioral model. And, I believe that alcohol is addictive and anyone can become dependent on it. But I also think as the younger you are when it's introduced, you really stunt your growth in a lot of ways from that point. And I think it's true in, women I've talked to, women I've worked with, women who've gone through this, and all of the many therapists I've seen through this process. You really have to go back to that age and work through those feelings and work through the trauma. It's almost like opening up a wound and re-healing it the right way. So I think a lot of people, if they really were to look at their addictions, I'm not saying everybody with an alcohol problem can go back and look and say they had a, traumatic experience, a sexual experience as a child, but it's usually filling something. And I think for a lot of women, there is that piece there that they have never, ever dealt with.
Yeah. And I see this, I work with a few different organizations, and it really is having to dig in and do the work. And like you said, go back to the trauma and reprocess the trauma. And there's just so many people that are not willing to let themselves go back to that. This episode brought to you and funded by Powerful Beauty. Are you thinking right now that you've heard enough and you are ready to start your own purpose-filled business? Well, then I think you should head over to the-powerproject.com/powerful business. Watch my video, read my story, and then book a discovery call where we can chat about how you too can be running your very own business full of purpose. That's the-powerproject.com/powerful business. What would you say to, for instance, people that it seems to be that they have suppressed all of the trauma in their life? It seems to be that they are functioning. It seems to be that they're not necessarily addicted to anything. However, the trauma still lies there. They still haven't processed it. What would you say to that woman that just says, right now, I'm trying to exist. I'm trying to get my kids out of the house, and I'll deal with all my junk when I have time for myself?
Well, I would say, and I've said this many times before, if you don't deal with your trauma, it will deal with you. And it's gonna come out at some point, and you don't know when, you don't know where, but you truly, even if you're surviving, even if you're functioning, and I think that really is when I say the highlight reel, and why I put that out there the way I did is I looked like I had it all together, and I looked like everything was going great. My business was going well. My family was doing great. And I was falling apart, slowly just falling apart at the seams. And I would say, again, it comes down to really being honest with yourself. And sometimes it's going to get worse before it gets better. I mean, I know for me, when I really started doing the work of processing everything I had gone through, things were tough. Like, it was really tough having to relive that again, but I would go through it over and over and over to have the life I have now and be able to deal with things the way I am now. I would say that, find a really good therapist, find a therapist who can do EMDR, and any therapist who's worked with people with trauma. It doesn't serve you having it locked up. And it doesn't mean you have to write a book and tell everybody about it. It means you have to be honest with yourself and deal with it yourself and see where it's manifested in your life, and really get to the bottom of that.
I agree. And I want to just point to the title of the book and the highlight reel. And because I think this is so crucial to every single woman listening, like whether there is alcohol addiction or anything. I want to read one little excerpt out of the book. So you said, the arc of trauma is long, and suddenly I felt like it was bending away from healing. I wanted a distraction, and as if 5 children weren't enough, I started looking for things I did have power over, namely our highlight reel. I wanted other people to think we were happy, perfectly dressed, adventurous, and fun. So this is hands down an epidemic in our society. I think that we both can agree to. It's such this catch-22, because especially when you're in a business that leverages marketing on social media, especially when you are building a personal brand on social media, how do we navigate this on social media? How do we show up as our best selves and serve others without, because there are so many women in the world that are doing exactly what you did and saying, I might be losing my mind. I might be suffering from anxiety and depression. I might be feeling lacking worth. But if I can just make it all look good online, then everyone's going to think we have it together. How do we combat that as a community?
I think we just have to do it one at a time. And I think there is starting to be a shift. I think people are talking about mental illness more, which encompasses so many things: anxiety, depression, workaholism, substance abuse. There are so many things under that umbrella. And I think the conversation is starting to change that, you go to the doctor when you have a cough, you go to the therapist when you need to talk about your feelings. Like, a marriage, if you want to keep your marriage healthy, you go see a marriage counselor. It doesn't mean something's wrong. I do see those conversations changing, but it depends who you're following, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think the biggest shift we've seen in like the last decade is, I don't know about you, but before Facebook, I had my friends who I talked to. I had my friends who I emailed. We shared pictures. We maybe didn't share all of the bad, but we also weren't inundated with all the good either. We didn't see all the birthday parties they were going to, or we didn't see all the vacations they were going on, all the pictures, all the perfectly filtered, friends that they had. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so the dichotomy wasn't as big. It was like, okay, I'm seeing a little bit of this person's life, a little bit of the good, a little bit of the bad. Well, now we've got social media where we only see people online. We really don't even talk to people anymore. We don't have as many phone conversations. We don't have as many authentic connections, but we have all of these internet connections, and everybody looks perfect, but yet you don't see any of the bad. So now we're inundated with this massive amount of good and this teeny bit of, oh, I'm going to a therapist. Oh, I've got an alcohol problem. Oh, I've got this. Oh, I've got that. And so I think the only way to do it, and I find myself struggling all the time, because guess what? I still want to share the great, happy pictures of my beautiful children. I still want to share the happy, like from our convention last week, I still want to show those pretty pictures. I still want to do that, but I think we just have to be better about balancing it with the reality of what's going on. So I find myself every time, like when I'm posting something, how can I make this really authentic to me? And so I just think people really need to get honest with themselves. And, it really starts with us. It starts with each and every person posting on social media and deciding if what you're sharing is really authentic to how you're feeling and what you're doing. And I think that's really the way to connect with people. And you can still build a beautiful personal brand. You can still build an amazing business by making it authentic to you and sharing also not all of the good things all of the time.
Absolutely. I think that just being honest, open, authentic, like you said, you don't have to air all the dirty laundry, and you can still build a brand, but you can just be true to who you are and what makes you up. And yeah, it's kind of, social media is kind of the Wild West. Like when our parents taught us etiquette and manners and the ways that you show up for people in the world, we never learned about how to interact with people on social media. We're all just kind of flying the airplane as we build it here. Mm-hmm. So I do think that, I've heard that Instagram is removing the likes. They've already done it in Australia, I believe, and Europe. And so they're removing the like factor just because of the way it is affecting our children, because our kids' mental health is getting wrapped up in how many likes their pictures received. So mm-hmm. I like the fact that those that have created the beast, which can be a beautiful, beautiful tool to utilize, are also saying we have to take some proactive steps and make sure that we're protecting the way this affects people. How do you balance a couple of things with your kids? Because you have 5 kids. What are their ages again?
Mm-hmm. So I have 2 boys who are 7 and 14, and then 3 girls who are 10, 11, and 12.
Mercy sakes alive.
Uh-huh.
Like I have a 13 and a 10-year-old, and you have added 3 more kids in the time that I have. Well, so with your children, I want to ask a couple of questions to you as a mom, because I think that we as mothers have to have conversations about parenting, because I 100% believe it takes a village. And I do feel that we're raising kids in one of the scariest times to be raising kids, just with the accessibility of everything at their fingertips. How do you have the conversations with them about protecting them and from trauma, from alcohol use, drug use, what does that conversation look like? And then also what type of, after that, I want to talk about what type of access they have to social media as well.
Sure. Sure. So luckily, and I do say luckily, like when people say, oh, it's too bad you're an alcoholic. I'm like, no, I'm lucky. I'm fortunate that I'm an alcoholic because, I do. It sounds crazy, but I feel so lucky that I have gone through what I have gone through and had the journey I have, because again, it's lended to such great parenting moments in this circumstance. Right. So I had, part of my story is as I got a DUI. And part of getting a DUI in Washington State is getting a breathalyzer put in your car. And so it took a very private thing that I probably wouldn't have shared with my kids and made it a forced conversation. And so again, this was several years ago, but my oldest two at the time, I picked up from school and I said, hey, I've got to tell you guys something. I got in trouble. It's against the law to go behind the wheel after you've had a drink. And I did, and I got caught. And this is my consequence. Now this is, making sure that I don't drink when I drive. And it was very uncomfortable for me to think, oh my gosh, I'm introducing this to my kids so early. But then at the same time, kind of like I said earlier, like I had a glass of wine in my hand every night and never thought twice about it in front of them. So they were confronted with this already. They already knew I drank. This wasn't a surprise for them. And so, my son said to me, he's like, so do you have to go to jail? And I said, no, this is my consequence. And he's like, okay. And then that was it. And from then on, it really was, we were able to talk about it. And, I've had the conversation with all of my kids now at this point. My 7-year-old, it's just, he knows mommy doesn't drink. That's all. But the older kids, they know that I used to drink. I can't drink. It affects me differently. And they also know that alcohol is a dangerous substance and that it's legal and people can, when they're old enough, can use it if they want to. But that this is how it's affected me. And especially with my 14-year-old, as he goes to things, parties or wherever he goes, with friends, and just letting him know that, hey, when I was your age, I was around people who had alcohol, and, this is how it affected me. And having it that young, this is how it affected me. And this could be how it affects you. So not taking away, obviously it's illegal. You're too young to do it. Like,
right.
I want to take away that authority of don't do it and don't tell me if you do. But just say, like, I know it's out there and you are old enough to make your own choices. When I'm not around, you're going to make your own choices, whether I like it or not. But you need to know the information. So for me, it's been more of a fact-based thing. And, it's led to really good conversations, and just from talking to my kids, they have a very clear picture of what alcohol is and what it can do to you, more than I did growing up. And not to say anything bad about my parents. Obviously, they didn't know that I was going to have a drinking problem, right? They didn't drink. So they were setting a great example for me. But yet I kind of had, I was doing this on my own, and again, trying to navigate it on my own. So having it be out in the open and having those conversations, has been so great on that aspect. And then as far as social media goes, it was funny when you were saying how, they're taking away the likes now because they figured out it's not good for kids. Like, I feel like they are doing things as they come up, but yet not fast enough. Like, I don't know if you follow any teenagers on social media, but they do this weird thing where they don't actually post any pictures. Like, they just use the stories and the messenger.
Yes.
Like my son, I'm like, you have 0 pictures on your Instagram. Like, what's the point of having an Instagram? But they just story each other and they message each other, and then they do Snapchat. And so I have the passwords for my kids' accounts. Just my 12-year-old's almost 13. So, they get a phone at 13. That's what we've done in our house. And so we have the passwords for everything. And we let them know, we can go in and log in whenever we want. But if we don't have a reason to, we won't. So don't give us a reason. So we have done like random checks here and there. And, there's never been anything worrisome. So I kind of toe the line of giving them the freedom to make mistakes, but also not make such big mistakes that are going to affect them for the rest of their lives. Right.
Yeah.
Just so they know, like, hey, maybe kids are texting photos that are inappropriate, but by the way, this is our phone. And so, you can't do things like that because we will be responsible. So having those conversations before they come up, I think is so important. But again, I think being open, having conversations and allowing for questions. And I think that's one thing I've said to my kids too, is like, hey, if you find something online that's weird or freaks you out, come tell me. Like, I'm not going to be freaked out and you're not going to be in trouble. Like, God forbid you stumble upon a website that's, pornographic or God knows what you can find on there. We've got all the filters, but you can only do so much as a parent. They can get anything and everything on the internet. So we've just been very clear of, hey, tell us, we get it.
Yes.
Like we've accidentally stumbled on stuff on the internet too that's freaked us out. So just know that, like, we're human beings, they're human beings, and kind of humanizing the experience a little bit, and while still, giving guidance, sheltering when we can. But man, I don't have all the answers. I wish I did. I sometimes wonder, there are days when I think, oh, I'm putting all the iPads and phones away. I can't do this anymore. And then there's days I think I have it all figured out. So I think it's experimental as you're raising kids, figuring out how to navigate. And like you said, you're flying the plane as you're building it.
Yeah. And I think that the literally number one most crucial element of parenting children and hoping that we raise some form of functioning individuals of society is exactly what you spoke to. And it's having those conversations, having the open dialogue, letting them know that they can talk to you, that they can ask questions. I also have the Bark app on my kids' devices, and I am obsessed with it. I actually became an affiliate with them because it just works so great. It took away all of the having to monitor like every single detail, and it just alerts you if there's something that it monitors their social media, their internet browsing, their text messaging, if there's something that comes up. So I'll send you some information on that.
Yeah, that'd be great.
It really was a great asset. But yeah, I think when our kids know that, hey, we're not perfect. Like, we screw up as parents, you screw up as kids, but as long as you know that nothing separates you from our love, then, we can deal with any of the issues that arise. So,
right.
So good job on that, Mama. And then I think before we go, if there were just one thing, and I think of your two girls, and then I think of the women that are being impacted by your story, and the women that are reading this, and the women that are saying, God, I've been through that. And maybe I'm not addicted to alcohol, but I suffer with, trying to make it all look pretty when I'm flailing. If there were just one thing that you hope that every woman that comes in contact with you in life, what is the one thing that you hope that those women know about themselves?
I would say, number one, you are strong enough to get through anything, but don't feel like you have to be strong enough to get through it alone. I think there's a big, I go back and forth with this whole idea of, oh, I'm brave, I'm strong, I'm, all of this, like we're in this society where we want to keep up with the men and beat the men, and we got to be strong, and we got to be, but we've got to balance that with, we need to talk to each other. Like, we can't hold up the world. And I feel like as women, especially as moms, we hold up so much more than our fair share in so many ways. And I think even if you can, like, you don't have to. And so for me, it was coming to terms with, okay, yes, I had all these kids. Yes, it was my responsibility to raise them. Yes, I have this job. Yes, it's my responsibility, but it doesn't mean I can't ask for help. And I had such a hard time asking for help. And I think a lot of women do. And help can look very different for everybody. But just talking to somebody, like unloading some of that and knowing that you're not being a burden to anybody else. I had so many friends after I kind of came out as an alcoholic who said, God, I had no idea. I wish I would have known. And my feeling was always, I didn't want to dump on other people. But yet, as I started dumping on other people, as I started talking about that stuff, then they were relieved too, because then they could say, oh my God, I felt that way too. I have felt like the burden is all on me. I have felt like I can't keep up. I've felt like I'm dropping the ball all the time. And so just to know that, yes, you can survive anything. You've survived everything up until this point today, but you don't have to do it alone. So reach out, whether it's you talk to a friend, whether you talk to a therapist, talk to your doctor, talk to somebody until you talk to somebody who gives you the relief that you need.
Yes. I think that is so, so good. I'm so thankful that you came on today, and it was lovely to meet you in person this year and get the book. I'm loving the book. I am almost to the end of it. I literally almost finished it as soon as I picked it up. But then, I like to leave, when I'm interviewing someone that I'm reading their book, I like to not read the whole book, because otherwise I feel the need to dig into the book, and I want people to go out and read the book on their own. So
yes,
I'm going to finish that now that I've already spoken with you. It's very well written, and definitely one that you pick up and you don't want to put down. Where can everyone find the book, and where can they find you both in person and online?
Yes. So I have a website, and it's emilylynnpaulson.com. The book is on Amazon. It's called Highlight Real, REAL, Finding Recovery and Honesty Beyond the Filtered Life. And I'm also on Instagram at Highlight Real Recovery. And again, it's Real, REAL.
Awesome. I think that you are going to reach so many people that you could never even imagine with this. I know that I have people that I'm going to be thrilled to share the book and this podcast with. So thank you so much for your obedience, your willingness to share this and impact others and let others heal from your experience. So I really appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you, Brandy, for having me.
Each week, I am honored and blessed that these women come on this show and share their authentic truth with those of you at home. My goal and my prayer is that the one person that needs to receive the message that we share during this interview receives it and takes action. If you need further inspiration to get sober, quit drinking, battle PTSD, battle anxiety, overcome suicidal ideation, do me a favor, reach out to me, reach out to Emily, get help. The national hotline for mental health and addiction is 1-800-662-4357. That's 1-800-662-HELP. And once again, if you could go write a review, subscribe, rate us, and share it with all of your friends. We want to continue bringing these conversations to you every week. I can't wait to chat with you next week, but until then, go out and live your best purpose-filled lives.